my channel. I am JCM Byrne, author of The Hybrid Helix and the newly released Partial Function. You can buy a copy that doesn't have this little not for resale bar on Amazon today. And this is my show, Book Burning, where I talk about books, comics, movies, and whatever else I feel like talking about, but I promise to never ever burn a book. And it's been a while since I had an episode, but I was inspired. I was reading and I came up with a plan. So we're going to do something a little different today. I hope you enjoy it. Don't know if you will, but what's life if not taking some risks? So what am I doing today? Today I'm going to do something different than my usual and than what I usually see on BookTube. I'm going to compare two different characters, compare and contrast. One of my own, so I'm doing, it's not a book review, a literary analysis of my own stuff, which is a little weird, and I'm going to compare it to a character, Tashue, who I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, and that's kind of embarrassing. I probably should have asked Crystal. Maybe it's Tashue. But the main character of the wonderful book called Legacy of the Brightwash, the first book in the Tainted Dominion. I think it was an SBFBO finalist. I should have looked that up before recording this, but I didn't because that's not how I roll. This is not a book review. Real quick, for me, it was a 5-star book. It was fantastic. You should read it. But that's not what this video is about. It's not a review. It's okay. That's what this is. I have notes. Why? Okay. So the reason I'm making this, there were two things that led me to make this video. So one, which was very interesting, there's an author, a lovely guy, great author named Luke Schultz, offered to read. Where is it? Partial Function, which is available now on Amazon. He read it as an arc, and very interesting. DNF the book, just fine, totally normal, right? Not everyone likes every book. That's how life is. But told me why. Private messaged me and said, Joe, sorry I couldn't, and he didn't owe me a sorry, right? You DNF a book of mine, you don't owe me an apology, and you certainly don't owe me an explanation. You're allowed to like what you like. You don't owe me a story about it. But he was kind enough to tell me why, which was nice, bonus. And he said he couldn't get into my characters because they had no internal monologues. And I thought, I have not heard this criticism. It's not really criticism or a stylistic point. I haven't heard this before. He's 100% correct. Hadn't been something I really thought about. And this isn't true. I don't want you to think that everyone dislikes my characters. Some people love my characters. If you read my reviews, and there's a number of them on Amazon, on Goodreads, some people say characters are great. But I don't do internal monologues. And I realized that sort of consciously only after reading what Luke said. So I owe Luke, big thumbs up. Thank you, Luke, for kind of bringing it to the forefront of my thoughts that this was a characteristic of my writing that may or may not work for certain people. And then, pretty much the same time, this all happened within the last few days, I was reading Legacy of the Brightwash, which I've been reading forever. I read very slowly. It's not a criticism of the book. It's not because the book wasn't good or absorbing. I just don't have time. And I've been loving this book. Like I said, great book. And I realized at some point, reading Legacy of the Brightwash, that the main character, I should really know how to pronounce his name, Tashue, is very similar to Rohan, the main character from the Hybrid Helix. Like very similar in a lot of ways, and yet the book has a almost diametrically opposite feeling to it. The way it's written, the style is almost completely opposite to how I wrote any of the Hybrid Helix books. But I'm going to speak specifically about Wistful Ascending because that's the first book in the Hybrid Helix, and I'm comparing it to the first book in the Tainted Dominion. I have not yet gotten to the sequel, whose name I can't remember, but it's up here somewhere, which I'm sure is equally as good. I've heard equally as good things. And what's it called? Legacy of Brick and Bone, which has boxing gloves on the cover, old-timey ones, which make me really happy because I'm a big fan of old-timey boxing gloves. So the cover is phenomenal. Anyway, that's not the point. That was a tangent. So I thought about these two things, and I thought that what's interesting is what Luke said and what Crystal's writing, as a contrast to my own, illustrates so beautifully, taken together, a way to look at books and at writing and at characterization and how they can be so different. It's almost like we're on maybe not opposite ends of the spectrum, but far apart on a spectrum of a way to write. And which is not me saying that my way is better at all. I hope no one comes away from this thinking I'm saying my book is better or my characterization is better. I'm sure it's better for some people, and I'm sure Crystal's is better for some people, and it may be that Crystal's is better for many, many more people. I don't know. I'm not making that decision or that judgment. So if someone says, well, most people prefer Crystal's way, I'm not arguing with you, right? That's I'm not saying one way or the other, numbers. But as a reader, you might want to think about which one do I prefer? Do I like this or that? And that might help you understand better why you like certain things and aren't as taken by other things. And that's all totally good. That's good. It's the better you know, it'll help you guide what's the next book you should pick up. Should you pick up my next book or someone else's next book, which is going to give you a better experience, which will resonate with you more. I don't know, but you can figure it out. This is just a tool. Okay, so who's doing this? This is me speaking about Crystal's book. I am not speaking on her behalf. Crystal and I are internet buddies. I've called her my sister from another mister. We've never met in person. I'm very fond of Crystal. She's great. She knows I'm doing this. I asked her if this was okay. She said it was fine. She had no problem with me doing this. But these are my thoughts and my analysis of her writing. This is not me quoting what she said about the book. Okay, so this isn't me saying, well, Crystal said when writing Legacy the Brightwash, blah blah blah. That's not what's happening. This is me having read the book, my interpretation of her text. So she might disagree with some of the things I say. I don't know. But you should not take this as that kind of attribution. She offered to do something along with, I don't know, maybe one day we'll have a talk where we get together and talk about some of the stuff. None of that's planned. Okay, who knows what will happen in the future. But this is my analysis of two texts, one of which I wrote, one of which she wrote. This is not Crystal's thoughts about the text. Again, it may line up with what she might agree. Oh yeah, Joe, that's exactly right. She might not. I have no idea. Okay. All right, so let's take the two characters. Now, I'm going to assume, this is important, I should have said this earlier, I'm going to kind of assume you've read both books, and I'm going to have to spoil both books. If I don't spoil the books to a certain extent, I can't do this video. So if you haven't read one of these books and you plan to read them, you should stop and don't watch the rest. If you have read them both, great. I'm not going to spoil the whole plot, but I'm going to have to say things about the revelations from the books because I'm talking about the characters from the books. There's no way not to do that. All right, so I'm going to assume you've read. I'm not going to go with an overview of what happened in these books. So what are the similarities? Well, the similarities, at first, there's kind of a lot. So both characters are older, right? Rohan's in his early 30s. Tashue's in his 40-ish. I forget exactly, maybe early 40s. They definitely over 40, right? He's got a grown son. 20-something, Jason. Both are strong. They have capacities in a violent way. Okay, so Rohan, it's very obvious. He can single-handedly slaughter thousands of people in a military conflict. Right? He's not. The whole scale is different. The scale's not the same. Tashue is clearly very good at hurting people and killing people, right? He's former military. He was a decorated military commander. People think he's very good when you want someone killed. If you can get him to do it for you, that guy's going to die, right? People aren't like, oh. And Tashue is interesting to see as this latent talent that's very large, but it does not manifest in this book. So that's a whole dimension that I don't know. I assume we'll see it at some point, but I don't really know. Okay. Actually, the fact that Crystal didn't manifest the talent in there, it's like a Fargo pregnancy thing. It's like Chekhov's gun. It's like you've got this thing on the table, a gun on the mantelpiece, and it never gets fired. It's very interesting because you really expect that in the finale, his talent will quicken and he'll blast everyone to smithereens and save the day. And that's really not what happens, at least not in book one. So that's a very interesting and lovely writing thing that you have this expectation that is not met. It's really well done, but that's not the point of this video. Okay, they're both former military. Both have their potency, some of their abilities are connected to a sort of darkness. Rohan literally goes berserk with rage, from mystically induced rage when he uses too much of his power. That is part of the setup, the world building for Rohan. Tashue just gets really pissed because there's a lot of anger inside him because he's had some shitty things happen to him in his life. I shouldn't laugh. It's not funny. It's not meant to be funny, but. They both have a lot of darkness inside them. Both are desperately trying to do the right thing. You definitely feel that neither of them is like, oh yeah, these people are suffering, ha ha ha, that's what they deserve anyway, right? You don't have that. They might do morally great things. You might say both of them do things that are bad. I think, but here's the thing. I think they would agree with you, and I think they do it reluctantly, the bad things they do, and they themselves think it's a shame that they had to do them, right? Tashue's working for the authority, which he knows, even at the beginning of the book, he knows they're not the good guys. They just might be the best choice he's got. He might feel like he has to, out of duty or whatever, do what they say, but he's not relishing it. He's not the kind of guy who's going out and he's, putting people in prison and relishing and enjoying the process. He'd rather find an alternative. He's just having trouble finding an alternative, which is, I think, very different. So he's really a good guy. The moral greatness is he does morally great things that he'd rather not do. He's not, again, going out and relishing any evil that he does. And Rohan, I hope, comes across, is certainly intended to be the same way. But Rohan, when he does bad things, he might lose his temper and do bad things, but then he does regret it. Some people think he doesn't regret it enough, and that's a valid criticism. But he does regret it. He doesn't go around saying, oh yeah, I slaughtered those people, and they deserved it, darn it, and I'm the good guy. That's not his mentality. So both of them are trying to do the right thing fundamentally. Both of them fail on occasion, which is also normal and interesting and worth exploring, but are definitely both people trying to be good. There are certainly, and they're both trying to be good in the face of the big bad, the immediate evil thing. In Rohan's case, in Wistful Ascending, the evil isn't really the Ursins. It's not even really the other hybrids. Yeah, they have a personal beef with Rohan that gets resolved at the end, these three. But they're not really the bad guys. The closest thing we have to bad guys in Wistful Ascending, as far as you know, unless I'm misremembering the book, is the Empire. And the Empire, he doesn't fight the Empire at any point in the book, really. He's left the Empire, but the Empire is this sort of, huge, vast, bureaucratic organization that does terrible things. And Rohan feels all through this book that there's nothing he can do about it. You can't fight the Empire. It's impossible. You can keep your head down and try to stay out of their way and try to do it the best you can within the context of understanding the Empire's out there and it's going to do what it's going to do and you can't stop it. And that's the authority in all of Legend of the Brightwash for the whole book. Until the for the first 95% of the book, until the climax. That is basically how Tashue envisions the authority, right? The society as it is too big, too powerful, too potent. He can't stop it or change it. He just has to try to live as best he can within the constraints of that setup. And he's going to do the best he can within that, but that may involve doing some bad things. That may involve not getting things that he wants. And he's, again, for most of the book, pretty resigned to that. So there's tremendous similarities there. But there are differences too. I mean, don't get me wrong. Personality-wise, if you were at a party with the two of them, I think it'd be a very different experience. I don't think people would describe Tashue as having as quippy as Rohan. His dialogue, I don't think, is as joke heavy. He also gets a lot more drunk because he's mortal, and Rohan can't really get that drunk very easily because he doesn't have a normal human physiology. And I think they're in different places in their career, and their careers are probably going to take different routes. Because what Rohan's done is he's gotten himself away from the Empire, that evil presence. He's away from. When Wistful Ascending starts, he's gone. He's done. He's not working for them anymore. He's at great moral and personal cost bought his freedom, and he's escaped. So he's got some breathing room. It's separated. And Tashue is still working for the authority at the beginning of Legend of the Brightwash, and at the very end, he's going to prison for it, right? So he doesn't get away. And there's no real sense at this point, after reading one book, that he's going to get away, at least not anytime soon. He may have to overthrow the authority to get away from them, but he doesn't have that distance, that separation that you get from Wistful Ascending. Again, please, this is not me saying that my way of writing this similar archetype is better or worse, or the crystal's better. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm saying they're different. I'm going to tell you why. I can tell you why I made the choices I made. I can make guesses as to why Crystal made the choices she made. Okay, so they're similar. They're different. Other differences. Tashue has a little more leverage on him that's keeping him where he is in his position. He's got his son who's in prison dying, and that keeps him from doing things that he might otherwise want to do because he's got these responsibilities that keep him trapped. Rohan, I cheat. He can't have a son. So that's literally part of the world building of the hybrids. They're sterile. It's a fundamental characteristic. It's actually why I started writing the books. That was the first idea. That was the beginning, the linchpin of the whole thing, is that the hybrids can't have children. So they don't have that leverage on him. So he's a little more, when Wistful Ascending starts, he's really just on his own. He gets friendships and attachments through the book, but really doesn't start with very much in the way of attachments. All right, so I've gotten to the end of my notes. So what am I because I only outlined the least important part of this discussion, and then I figured I'd wing the rest because that makes sense to me somehow. Okay, so what are the differences in the way that the writing is done? And I'm gonna actually, and I asked Crystal if this was okay. So I don't want you to you can call her or message her and say, Joe did this, and is it okay? And hopefully she'll back me up. Okay. I'm going to read a section. This is from location 7828, 77% through the book. And this is just Stella stayed the night. The market fire had just happened. And this is internal monologue. I'm going to read you an example of internal monologue where you're going to get Crystal's giving us a picture of what is inside Tashue's head. Tashue? I don't know. What the hell's an E with an asterisk? It's got to mean something. Okay. The market still smelled of smoke and burnt thermite, or maybe that was the memory seared into Tashue's mind. The charred buildings still stood along the river. What little of the wharf remained had been stripped back to be rebuilt. Those efforts had begun, planks of fresh timber lying in the streets in great bundles, waiting to be put to use. Okay, that's physical descriptions of Ilya's timber, stamped with the winter crest, donated to his feet brought him to the market square, and he found himself looking up at the statue of Bronwyn. So this is just description so far. This is just physical, what's going on. It was, now we get to the inside. Now we're in his head. It was hard not to remember the sound of his imberlay discharging, the wails of the man as he died and fought for his son's life. So much had happened since then that he hadn't had the chance to think about it. But now there was no hiding from what he'd done in that ugly moment. Tashue knew all too well what it was to fight for a child, for a son, and he should have done more to diffuse the danger. This isn't Crystal telling us he should have done more. This is Tashue thinking he should have done more. He pushed the memory through his mind over and over again a few times, trying to imagine what he would do differently. He's imagining. He shouldn't have left Stella's side. Whoops. He should have known how badly the death of a child could cut through a person. He should have listened to the man's voice, should have heard the wild desperation there. But the words the man had used cut through everything good and civilized in Tashue. Lying, tainted bitch. Sounded entirely too much like filthy Kadari. I can't pronounce that word. Kadairi whore. What world did he live in that women like Stella and his mother were reduced to such ugly words by men who saw them as tools to serve them and their needs? A man's wife died in spite of Shan Blackwood's best efforts, and she became a filthy Kadairi whore. A child died. Had Stella given that child her best efforts? If she hadn't, did that give the man the right to call her a tainted bitch? She had healed people in Yale's mirror before. I can't say any of these words. That's what Taryn Bayside said. Why hadn't she saved that boy? Was it because Tashue was standing over her shoulder oblivious? Or was it because that boy was so damaged that he couldn't have been saved? Healers weren't miracle workers after all. Okay. I'm not saying that's the best passage like this in this book. I think it's a very good passage. Maybe there are better ones. I don't know. I didn't spend like 4 hours digging through this to find an illustrative passage. But this is a whole big section. It's like a full page on my Kindle. Look, it's like a whole page and then part of the next page in my Kindle. Kindle Oasis, good purchase. About all what's going on inside this guy's mind while he's standing there looking at like a burnt building, okay? Nothing's happening physically. You're not really even getting a description of him. She's not saying tears run down his face as he thinks, right? You don't know. There isn't any description of his hand clenching, right? And this isn't critical, but when people say show don't tell as a writing advice, they're actually in a way arguing to a certain extent against stuff like this, which I think is a mistake, right? This is easy to do poorly. Crystal does it well. It's well done. It fits the book. The book is fantastic. It's hard to pull that off. You have to write it well, and Crystal does, and it's excellent. It's hard as well. So it's why often people will advise writers not to try or not to do too much of this, because it can be difficult to pull off. Okay, so then Wistful Ascending. I think this is like an old version, because I don't think the new covers look this matte. I think I got the matte cover. I don't know where I got this book. Okay, so I have a scene where Rohan. This is after Rohan wakes up after the one traumatic scene in this book. He's killed all the bad bears, the Inquisition. He wiped them out, and he's waking up in a regen tank, and he's just realized that he has flipped out and committed war crimes. Okay, he has on the page committed war crimes, killed people with his bare hands, slaughtered them, who were surrendering, okay, after they themselves, now, they weren't good guys, but still, okay. He floated in the tank as his memories of the battle against the Ursins bubbled up through his consciousness, talking about the interior here. Without the anger to shield him, the horror of what he had done struck him like a blow to the chest. Oh God, Wei Li's gaze did not waver. God, gotta have a friend like Wei Li, right? Always good to just stare you down when you're having a moment of crisis. Rohan swallowed, flooded by a desperate, anxious desire to leave the tank, to move away, to run, to fly as fast as he could. Wei Li cleared her throat. You must stay in the tank for now, doctor's orders. Please restrain yourself, because I am unable to do so. He struggled to calm himself. Okay. He let out a long, slow breath, held his empty lungs, filled them again. That's it. That's my entire description of his interior. Okay, he had a feeling. He let out a long, slow breath. Now, then he's having a whole conversation with Wei Li for the next several pages. So that whole thing was like this much, okay, that I read. That's it. And most of it was someone else talking, or him talking, or a description of physical stuff going on. There's no page where I go and I say, he thought back to what he'd done to the bears, and how he had promised himself, he'd sworn he would never do that again, and but in the heat of the moment he had lost his calm yet again. How could he ever escape this unrelenting pressure of his own rage? I could have written that. I'm not saying I could have written it as well as Crystal could have written it. Right? I'm not. That's not the comparison I'm trying to make. I don't walk you through that interior. At any length. I talk very briefly. He has a feeling of despair, whatever, and that's it. I don't go further than that. I don't go through, thinks back to all the other times he's killed people. Instead, and I'm not saying this is, I can't even repeating myself, I'm not saying this is a better way to do this character or this story, this kind of story. But instead of me telling you what's going on within him, I'm going to tell you what he does. There's a scene later on in the book, or earlier, where he's fighting the other hybrids and they're threatening to kill him, and he says, maybe I ought to die. And that's where you find out what his interior was, by this much more surface level thing where he has thoughts in italics where he just, maybe I ought to die. That's it. That's a sentence. And that, to me, my goal is, you can read it on face value, or you can think about that and go, why is he saying maybe I ought to die? Maybe I ought to let them kill me. And you can infer that he must have had a dialogue just like what I was just describing. It must have been going on in there. He must have been having all these thoughts. Oh, I lost my temper again. I can't escape. I've done all these terrible things to try to get someplace where this would never happen again, and I would never do these evil things again. And yet, here I am doing them again, despite all that. I don't have him wallow in despair, and I don't tell you about that monologue because that's not the kind of book I wanted to write. And that book, had I written that book, same story, but where I give that to you, where I include all that, it might have been a better book. It might have been a better book for you. I don't know who you are, because this is a video. That's not how this works. you might have enjoyed it more. You might have felt more pulled into this character if you had actually read that. If I had a page of all that stuff, but I don't do that. That's not my writing style. I'm going to let you think of it yourself, and Crystal will pull you in. Crystal will drag you, whether you like it or not, into these characters. And what that will do is it will, well, first of all, it's a different kind of work for the reader. I don't want to say, it's a different kind of work for the reader when you get pulled in rather than having to infer it from the exterior events. Oh, he does this, therefore he must be feeling a certain way. He must have had this thought process. Crystal will tell you what the thought process is, and that will lead you to understand why he does the thing he does. She'll drag you through it. Drag is, I don't mean drag in a pejorative way. She'll yank you, right? She'll grab you by the throat and pull you into these characters. And you'll really understand why they do what they do. I'm not going to do that. If you want to really understand what Rohan does, you got to pay really careful attention to what he says and what he does, and that'll give you insight into what's going on inside. But I'm not going to tell you. Okay. So that's one difference. And that difference also, I feel, leads to a different kind of emotional impact in the way these two books are written, and some choices that on my part were deliberate, and I assume on Crystal's were. So when I was reading Legend of the Brightwash, there were many places where I felt a lot of dread and a sort of low-level anxiety or worry. Maybe anxiety is not the right word. Maybe it's worry. I felt bad for these characters. I felt worry that, like, this dread that something bad was about to happen. Something bad was about to happen. It was very clear. It was being set up. Everyone who has things, those things are taken away. Their losses are coming. His son is dying bit by bit in prison. I mean, it's awful what's happening to them. And you see it close up and at hand. He sees his son. He doesn't see all the beatings, but you see the marks. You feel for him because he's looking. You can imagine, especially I'm a parent. I don't think you have to be a parent to figure this out, but you see your kid dying bit by bit in front of you. You go to visit, and he's beaten, and his toes are crushed, and it's very painful. And then if you compare that to and then even the experiences he had in wartime, he gives some pretty vivid descriptions of like some of the sensory experiences he had of like smelling charred flesh, nearly dying. In detail, you get a sense that the darkness in his past, you feel it much more immediately, and then immediate, right, without mediation, no mediating layer. It's immediate, in the real sense of that word. And in Wistful Ascending, right, the worst things he's done are described very loosely and very without a lot of sensory detail, and he doesn't ever describe being like elbow deep in the blood of Ptolemeans. He says, yeah, I may have committed a minor act of genocide in Ptolemea, and that sounds awful, but you're not dipped into it. I'm not pulling you in and having you feel what he must have felt to commit an act of genocide on a population with his own hands. He says that happens, but I don't drag you through that. So what I'm trying to do is give you the ability to infer and imagine and if you want, and you don't have to. You can read. That's the funny thing about the hybrid helix, and it's something I kind of did on purpose. You can read these books and sort of really think about, oh, that must have been awful. Oh, I can imagine what that, and really think, like, put the book down for a second, think it through, and realize some horrible stuff was happening. But I'm not going to drag you through it on page. So if you don't want to, and you just want to flip through and think of it as an action story, you can read it at that level, and you may enjoy it at that level. And that was kind of my goal. Whereas what Crystal does is she doesn't give you a level to escape to. You don't get a chance to just imagine what these characters are feeling and thinking and what their emotions are like in the pits of their bellies, because it's on the page. You don't get to put the book down and think, oh, I wonder, or I'm going to stop wondering because I just want to see the next fight scene. You can't, because it's right there. And again, I'm not in any way saying that this is a worse way to write a book. It might be a better way to write a book. I saw some reviews. What did I see? That this book destroyed me in all of the best ways. Guess which book that review is from? I'm going to tell you, it's not mine. Right? It broke my heart, moved me to moments of intense anger, but also hopefulness. and ultimately delivered one of the best stories I've ever read. That's Nick Borelli, Out of This World, SFF Reviews. I pulled that randomly off Amazon. Every review of Crystal books, some of them are better written than others' reviews, but they all say something like that, right? They all say something similar, that, you know, she's pulling you in because of this interior monologue, because she's giving you the feeling, she's putting it on the page, and unless you skim those sections, you're going to feel it. The funny part, you know, another funny part, we're doing the same thing, we're treating it the same way, the sex scenes. My sex scenes are fade to black, right? They wake up cuddling, and they're naked. So you imagine sex happened, but I'm not describing it. Crystal's scenes are not fade to black, so they're very explicit, and they're there, and you can skim them, because I did. I'm not an explicit sex scene reader. That's just my preference. They were great. They were super well written. I mean, I read them, and then after like a couple, I was like, okay, I'm gonna get the gist here, and then move on. But you know, you get a more immediate sense. And one of the things is, though, this book will destroy you. And if you are a certain kind of sensitive reader, I know people who are. I know people who don't like having their emotions dug up to this extent when they're reading. They prefer lighter fare. People do. There are people who only read books that don't have a lot of depth, where they never have to feel too much. They don't want to feel too much. And the legacy of Brightwash is going to ruin them. Like, you're not going to enjoy this book. If you're that kind of a reader, if you don't want to feel things in your gut, don't read Legacy of the Bright. It's not going to work for you. All right? You can't avoid it. And with my book is more on the other end of that spectrum, right? You can avoid those deep feelings, those gut feelings, if you want. If you want to read it as a light fare, you can. I'm not going to make you feel too much. There are scenes, right? I'm not. Neither Crystal nor I are writing all of one thing and none of the other, right? That's not how the writing works. But you can imagine we're on different sides of the thing. So, because we're very different writers, and thinking about these things different ways, we have these two really extraordinarily similar characters. But I've never heard anyone compare our books. You will never read a review that says, oh, if you like Wistful Ascending, you'll also like Legacy. No one's going to say, if you like one, you like the other, despite the fact that the big themes we're hitting are almost the same. The main characters are extremely similar in many ways, not all, but many. But they're extraordinarily different books. And if you, as a reader or as a writer, can figure out, you know what, this is what I want, and that's more of this, less of that, whichever way. And again, I'm not in any way saying you should pick Write Like Joe. I'm not. If you want to, great. But if you want to write like Crystal, better look, you know. And you might want to say, oh, writing like Crystal is actually harder, or writing like Joe is, I have no idea. I'm not making a claim that one of these is easier. I'm not making a claim that one of these is better, certainly. I know that for me, writing like me is much easier. I don't know if I could write like Crystal. Probably not, but if I could, it would be really hard. I don't know if Crystal could write like me. I have no idea. Maybe she would knock it out of the park if she tried to write a book like mine. I have no idea. That's not for me to say. But if you as a reader or as a writer prefer one of these over the other, you can deliberately tailor your writing, you know. So if you want to write like Crystal, but you've got someone in your back of your head going, show don't tell all the time, you gotta learn to ignore that sometimes. Sometimes you gotta tell what's going on inside. You can't show an interior monologue, right? But then if you want to write like me, you listen to that more often than not, because show don't tell is how I write. That's my like guiding mantra. And again, I'm not saying you should do one or the other, but you should pick where you want to be. And if you want to be right in the middle, be right in the middle. Do both. That's great. You know, pull that off. So that was my video. I loved her character. I love Krista's book, and I just thought, given how, in a superficial way, Tashue was so much like Rohan, and yet reading Brightwash was so different in experience than Wistful Ascending. That's what fascinated me, and I wanted to dig in to how this happened and how she pulled it off, and how I pulled it off, and how it was so, what made it so different. So that's the video. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you like and subscribe. I hope you buy all my books and all of Crystal's books. of which I believe there are two, although I think she has short stories out in anthologies. I should have checked this before I made this video, but instead I didn't. So you don't have to do your own work. And keep an eye out. I have a weekly anthology fantasy magazine that's going to be coming out soon, as in the next couple months, hopefully by the new year, and called Grim Dwarf Magazine. And it may be an anthology of one. I'm not 100% sure how the licensing is going to work out, if I can actually have other people contribute or not. But I'm going to do it because I'm obsessed with this idea, and it may be crap, but it might not be. So keep an eye out, and you can give it a try. It's going to be free, so the cost to you will be small. And as always, if you get any of my free stuff and it doesn't work for you, and it's not at least 4-star reads for you, any of my freely distributed things, I will promise you a full refund out of my own pocket. Just DM me on Twitter, and I'll compensate you for the financial cost of your investment. So that's it. I'm JCM Berne. I hope you have a great day. I hope you find great books to read, and I hope you have a wonderful time. And I hope you got something out of this video. So take care.